Hello and welcome to our weekly look inside Syria with me, David Foster. Leaders from Syria's newly formed opposition, the Syrian National Coalition, held talks in London on Friday with the UK government. Britain's saying it welcomes the establishment of the group, but that it's too early to recognise it as the legitimate opposition to President Assad. Its leader, Ahmed al-Khatib, then went on to Paris, where François Hollande, the French president, became the first world leader officially to recognise the Syrian National Coalition. Diplomacy versus the on-the-ground reality of continued suffering. Before we discuss calls to arm the opposition, let us hear from Andrew Simmons in Aleppo, who reports that the shortage of doctors and medicine is getting worse.
In Syria's war, the demands on medical services are all-consuming. They can't get enough help. And this Italian ambulance, heading on its first call-out to a field hospital, is a rarity. A fighter has been stabilised shortly after leaving the front line. This is an urgent transfer. He needs surgery.
For fighters, for civilians, it doesn't matter. We just try to help people here. We need more ambulances.
The voluntary civilian group, Saduk, is trying to get more international donors, having made a start with 2 ambulances imported from Italy. Saduk also provides ration packs for destitute families. Paid work all but disappeared when this part of Aleppo was taken by the rebels. The enemy for the people is poverty.
They're in desperate need. They've lost everything. We don't know how it's going to be this winter. We're doing the best we can with what we have.
Saduk has volunteers on both sides of the divide in Syria. This diesel fuel tanker is supplying bakery ovens and the generators for hospitals. They tell us it's come from Assad forces in a clandestine operation using soldiers who sympathize with the rebels.
We prefer that they stay with the regime and don't defect until their mission is done. They deceive the army into thinking that the heating oil is going to military bases, when in fact it's coming to us.
It's the medical services where Saduk says it needs the most help. It may be a small beginning, but this is the sort of non-urgent work this organisation wants to focus on. This man, walking wounded, was caught in a bomb blast and has shrapnel injuries. This patient has already had 2 operations for an abdominal injury, and he's on his way for more surgery.
All the world has turned its back on us. Arabs, Muslims, Christians, Buddhists have let us down. We're being killed and no one is listening to us.
Saduk's new ambulance service is in big demand, along with all of its other work, in a place where help is hard to find. Andrew Simmons, Al Jazeera, Aleppo, Syria.
Well, Britain's Foreign Secretary William Hague says his country is willing to recognise the new Syrian opposition, but only if certain conditions are met.
The formation of the coalition is a very encouraging development, and I'm further encouraged by the discussions that I've had with them this morning. It is important, of course, and I have stressed to them, that they respect minority rights, that they are inclusive of all communities in Syria, committed to a democratic future for the people of Syria.
So what is needed on the ground? Here are the thoughts of a senior member of that new coalition.
And inside Syria, we definitely need quality weapons, namely anti-aircraft missiles. Any relief aid given to the Syrian people only remedies are the aftermath of an assault. At the same time, many homes are destroyed, people's hopes are dashed, and the future ruined.
Well, joining us to discuss this, our guests in Oxford, Oliver Miles, former UK ambassador to Libya. In Kuwait, Fahed Al-Shelaimi, security analyst and former colonel in the Kuwait Army. And in Moscow, Sergei Alexandrovich Markov, a Russian political analyst. Welcome all of you to this edition of Inside Syria. Ambassador Miles, first of all, from your reading of the situation, how are the rebels getting arms at the moment?
Well, they're not getting them from Europeans, I don't think. They're getting them, if they're getting them at all, from some of the Arab states, I believe, possibly Doha, possibly Qatar, but not, I think, from any Europeans.
And in terms of the cooperation amongst those Gulf states, have you seen it steadily increase, or has it been pretty level since the start of this conflict? 'Cause we're talking 18 months now.
Yes, I think that it's been pretty steady. I think the view of most outside governments is that providing arms to the rebels is not the way to solve the problem. And if you look at the communique that was issued after the meeting a couple of days ago of all the Arab League and European Union ministers in Cairo, they start off their statement on Syria by calling on all parties to end the violence. Well, it's not really consistent with that to provide weapons.
Mr. Al-Shelaimi, in Kuwait, when France calls for an EU embargo on arms sales to be relaxed to allow what it calls defensive arms to be given to the rebels, what could you classify as defensive weapons?
Thank you, David, and my best regard for your guests. I think the reason in the Gulf, in GCC countries, that is the public, the locals, the citizens are pressing on their government to be open more and support the Free Syrian Army. That is one of the main things. That is a government under pressure from street, from the press, from writers, from Islamic activists, because we normally every night could see the bombardment against civilians, against children, and these kind of pictures and these kind of actions, I think, cleared the legitimacy over Assad's regime.
But if I could draw you back to the point of the question, sir, is France saying, let's relax the arms embargo, let's give those fighting the Assad regime defensive weapons? Well, what would they be?
Yeah. The Assad regime lost his battle on minds and hearts. I think all the rebels, we saw them on TV channels, asking for SAMs missiles,
that's surface-to-air
missiles.
Surface-to-air missile.
Yes, surface-to-air missiles. And the reason because the Assad is having air superiority at the present time, local air superiority over the rebels. On ground factor, I think the rebels are moving and advancing in using a guerrilla warfare, not maintaining on the ground, but it's attrition war. The rebels are asking for this kind of weapons, and of course there is restrictions by the manufacturers to export or to be a second-hand exporters to another countries. Nevertheless, there is some attempt to get these weapons for the rebels, and the result we could see it in the last 3 or 4 weeks. We see an advancing troops, we see villages and countryside is under the control of the oppositions and the Free Syrian Army. In conclusion, I think the West, and I mean the West, the main 3 countries, should allow that we support the Free Syrian Army because there is no legitimacy for the Assad regime at the meantime. I think that is the best solution. And because they have a chain of command, because they have a political identity, a government, a semi-government with a political identity, the Syrian opposition, I think there is some restrictions and control over this arms. Where does it fall?
But the suggestion, I mean,
at the meantime, we should end this catastrophe.
Yeah, people who know more about this than I do is that there could be as many as 19 disunited groups within Syria, all claiming that they need weapons to take the fight forward. Ambassador Miles, Robert Fox, I'm sure you know the man I'm talking about, respected writer on military affairs in the UK. He says, when it comes to David Cameron possibly thinking of relaxing the arms embargo and moving weapons to the Syrian rebels, he says, who is Cameron suggesting we send arms to? And what kind of arms? This is the danger, isn't it? You don't know where they're going to end up and where they're going to go from there.
Yes, that's right. That's one of the main inhibitions on Britain and on other countries supplying arms in a situation like this. You don't know where they're going to end up. I think that the the political pressures that our Kuwaiti friend referred to are felt also in Britain and other European countries. Not perhaps as strongly and emotionally as they may be felt in Arab countries, but still there is strong pressure on the government in Britain to do something. And what is that something? Well, at the moment, what the something is to talk very seriously to this new coalition of the resistance in Syria and try to establish that they are worthy of support, that they are genuinely inclusive, that they include more or less all and intend to include all Syrian factions, religious groups and so on, and also that they support decent government, democratic principles in the future. That if they pass all those tests, and it looks as though they will pass them, then we will be ready to support them. We, Britain and other European countries, I believe. But with arms, I'm not so sure.
Well, let me go
I
to
hope not,
Sergei.
I must say. I personally believe that it would be a mistake.
Sergei Markov in Moscow, a spokesman for your foreign ministry said pretty much the same as Ambassador Miles there, that it would not be the right road upon which to start travelling to arm the rebels. What would Russia's response be, however, if the flow of weaponry to Syria increased markedly?
I think Russia will not respond. I think maybe Bashar al-Assad respond, possibly Iran will respond. Because this war, civil war in Syria, it's the war not between Syrians. Syrians on the hands by outside players. This is war of a big coalition which include Saudi Arabia, Persian Gulf monarchies, Turkey, Western coalitions which include France, United States, Israel, against Iran. This clear war against Iran, and only problem with Bashar al-Assad that he is ally of Iranian regime. If he not, this war will not happen. And Russia doesn't support just Bashar al-Assad. Russia support the principles that it would be very chaotic international politics if everybody will send its money, weapons, troops to every country when he wants to send. And we think that it's very dangerous development, first of all, for Islamic world, because somebody wants to create big religious war in Islamic world between Shiites and Sunnis. And maybe some of the
who is that
Sunni
somebody
politicians now
who
dream
wants to
that
create
it's
further friction
good
between
time for them.
Shia
Why
and
you don't want to listen voice from Russia? Sorry.
I'm just saying,
We don't-
you
why
say
you
somebody
don't
wants to create a greater war, greater friction between Sunni and Shia. Who wants to do that, in your opinion?
United States and Israel.
Let's go to Kuwait.
Yeah, let me comment on this. You see, that is the problem, the Arab world with the West. There is 40,000 or more people were killed, human rights violation, and a human catastrophe. And the West leaders, always we have this old say words, let's talk, let's negotiate. And that is the gap between the Arab world right now and the West. That's why we look on the eye of suspicious to the Western leaders. You see, there is a clear-cut case. There is a regime and there is a people. 70% of this, I would like to respond to my friend Sergei. 70% of this population is a Muslim Sunni, by the way, in Syria. Yes, they are like a mosaic, and I agree of that. Yes, we agree there will be the right of minorities. Yes, Iran involvement. Why? Because Iran involvement, Syria is making shields. The regime right now is making a shield and protecting Iran by harboring Hezbollah also. So Iran think it has a strategic interest with Syria. If the regime falls, Iran will be exposed. And
I'm going to give Sergei Markov a chance to reply to that, and then draw the discussion back to where I thought we were going in the first place. Mr. Markov in Moscow, your response to what you've just heard.
I think that Bashar al-Assad regime has strong support during many, many years. And we know that the style of so-called rebels with very big support from outside, very barbaric. They killed hundreds and thousands of civilians who support Bashar Assad regime. And it's very strange with whom our friends from Washington and friends from Paris, from Israel want to establish democracy in Syria with Saudi Arabia and another with Persian Gulf monarchy. It's a very strange pro-democratic coalition where Saudi Arabia play leading role.
Okay,
it's a joke.
I'm going to go back to Oliver Miles here. Ambassador Miles in the UK. The spokesman for the Russian Foreign Ministry a couple of days ago said he felt that sending any arms to the rebels would be against international law, quoting the United Nations on this. Is it as straightforward as that?
Not so far as I'm aware. I don't think that there is any clear United Nations position on this, except that, let's say, a binding position, let's say a Security Council resolution or something of that kind. There is, of course, agreement by the Security Council members. There have been agreement on several occasions in the last few months, in the last year, about Syria. There was the Geneva communique. There was the support for Lakhdar Brahimi's mission in Libya, and that essentially the heart of the program that Lakhdar Brahimi has been given is this is a political problem between Syrians, and the Syrians have to find the solution to it, and the international community has to assist them to do that. That's a different emphasis from the one that we were getting from Mr. Markov in Russia. Of course, those other international interests are there. I'm not denying that. The division between Shia and Sunni is there. But the heart of the matter is a disagreement between Syrians.
If I were to say to you that looking at what the French have decided to do, recognise this official coalition, might suggest that they believe that there is no other way but to remove President Assad by force, what is the British position regarding that? How close is Britain to making the same sort of assessment?
Well, if you're right in saying that that is the French position, I think the British are quite a long way away from it. I've read carefully and listened carefully to what British spokesmen have been saying in the last day or two, and they have not talked about arms at all, as far as I'm aware, in the last few days. The decision was taken some months ago to supply non-lethal equipment to the Syrian opposition, the Syrian resistance, but there hasn't been any discussion that I'm aware of, or public discussion in the last day or two about arms. The same, incidentally, goes for America. If you look at the quite long statement that President Obama made about Syria at a press conference 2 or 3 days ago, he talked very much in the terms of supporting this new body, checking it out, talking to it, finding out what it stands for, and we hope in the end working with it. But he did not talk about arms, and I don't think that any Western government that I'm aware of has addressed the question, how would we remove President Assad's regime by force? That's not what we're about. I say that with the reservation that the situation is terrible, the human suffering is very great. The British Prime Minister, for example, David Cameron, was in Jordan 2 or 3 days ago, met a lot of Syrian refugees, and was clearly deeply shocked by what he saw. And you can't rule out the possibility of a change of plan, a change of policy based on those considerations. But I don't see it, because I think it would be wrong, and I think it wouldn't work. I'm
going back to Moscow to get Sergei Markov's view on perhaps the French position changing and perhaps an inching towards the use of force, whether directly or indirectly, to remove President Assad. What would Moscow's position be on any attempt to do that?
No, opposition, both Russia, France, United States, Israel, Iran, stays same during all this conflict. Only tactic a little bit changing. Everybody knows that Bashar Assad, one of the mostly liberal leader of Middle East country, who tried to liberate political regime, and who, by the way, because he's liberal, is only protection for a lot of minorities in Syria, including Christian minorities, which we very much care about. And we afraid that after such barbaric position where Al-Qaeda has a lot of influence, and which is very familiar with what's happening in Libya when, you know, they kill U.S. ambassador, maybe if they come to power, they will open their repression against ethnic and confessional minorities, including Christians and in Syria. We're very much concerned about this. But all the countries
I'm going to stop
to be
you there,
safe.
not
they
because
want
I
to
don't
kill
want to hear
Syria
what you've got to
only
say,
because
but
Iran.
Fahed Al-Shelaimi in Kuwait was shaking his head at that point, so I'm going to give you a chance to get in right now, and then we'll go back to Moscow.
I think the words of Islamic phobia is putting on any rebels or any freedom movement, and that is the story, or that's the cover story to support dictatorial regimes. Free Syrian Army consists not from Islamic extremist groups only. No, the majority of the Syrian armies consist of from former militaries.
But I don't think, with respect, that is to what
leaders.
Mr. Markov was referring. He was referring to other groups away from the Free Syrian Army, perhaps Al-Qaeda.
That's why they need. That's
and
why
into
they
their
need,
hands may be falling some of these weapons.
David, that's why they need to have a strong and a free Syrian army and to have that political identity for this army. That's why we need to support the military, because they will control the situation. There is a chain of command. There is a SOPs on that body. That's why we need to support the military. And how we support the military or the former military on the Free Syrian Army? By weapons, because they will be on the ground. They will have the upper words on the ground.
Okay,
That's why
I'm going to Sergei Markov now, and then I'm going to Ambassador Miles
the extremists will gain the scene.
For a final word, same question to each one of you. Sergei Markov, first of all, are we any closer, is Lakhdar Brahimi any closer to solving this situation, finding any kind of solution than maybe 2 months ago?
No, we're very far from solving the situation. Bashar al-Assad never will leave the Syria, because Bashar al-Assad, very responsible politician. He understands if he leaves the Syria, regime will fall down, and as a result, thousands of his supporters, including Alawites, including Christians, and all another ethnical and confessional minorities in Syria will be repressed, and thousands of people will be killed by Syrian Al-Qaeda, who is the leading force now in these Syrian rebels. And only guilty of Syrian people that they're very close to Iran regime. Only that Alawites close to the Shias in Iran. And I think some rivals of enemies of the Iranian regime will continue to hit Syria, and they want to kill Syria. We think it will be a very bad solution. And as a result, it can lead to the big war in the Middle East.
Is it your assessment that perhaps not only have things not improved in the last few months, but we are now far worse off in terms of trying to find any kind of solution, whether it be through releasing an arms embargo or through diplomacy?
Personally, I think that the formation of the coalition is a step forward. If you think about it, Lakhdar Brahimi's mission, the UN mission, the hopes that some of us have for a peaceful solution were not going to be realized if there was no unified Syrian resistance body which could speak, not for 100%, but broadly for the whole resistance. And that condition seems on the way to being met. I think the British and American governments are quite right to be cautious, but they've actually moved quite quickly to welcome this new body. William Hague was talking about he's already talked to them himself. He's talking about further discussions with them in detail early next week. I think that if we find that we've got as a player in the game, someone who can really speak for a moderate, democratic Syrian future, that is a tremendous step forward. It's not the end of the game, and Lakhdar Brahimi and the UN may not be able to succeed in bringing a political solution, because that will depend in the last resort on some kind of deal involving the present Syrian regime, which is still there. But it's a step forward.
Ambassador Miles, thank you very much indeed for being one of our guests on Inside Syria this week. From Kuwait, Fahed Al-Shelaimi. We thank you too. And Moscow, Sergei, Alexandrovich, Markov. And thank you for watching. Our Syrian coverage continues 24 hours a day on our website, aljazeera.com. And there you can also find this programme if you want to watch it once more. From everybody here on Inside Syria, from me, David Foster, goodbye for now. See you next time.